Welcome to Dreamy Old Stories. Here we tell slow and gentle tales from history. Stories that calm your mind and help you fall asleep. If you enjoy the journey, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin tonight's dreamy story. As the story continues, the pace remains slow and unhurried. There is no rush, only the quiet passing of time. You may listen closely or simply let the sounds fade as the night gently moves forward. We return again, quietly, without rushing. The ancient city is already familiar to us now. The darkness no longer feels empty or threatening. It feels lived in. Night has become a shared condition, something the city understands. The watchman steps into this darkness not as a hero, but as a continuation of routine. His work does not begin with urgency, it begins with acceptance. In the ancient world, night was not an interruption of life. It was a phase of it, a slower phase, a softer one. For the watchman, night was structured by time, but not by numbers. There were no glowing clocks, no precise minutes. Instead, time was sensed. The early part of night carried warmth from the day. Stone walls still released heat. People lingered near doorways. Quiet conversations drifted through narrow streets. This was the first watch. During this time, the watchman moved visibly. He was seen, recognized, sometimes acknowledged with a nod. Nothing about this hour was secretive. The city was closing itself gently. As darkness deepened, sound changed. Footsteps became rare. Voices faded. Animals settled. This was when the watchman slowed not because he was tired yet, but because the city demanded listening rather than movement. He paused often, stood still. Let the night speak. In these hours, silence carried information. A door opening too late. A sound repeating when it should not. A sudden absence of a familiar noise. The watchman learned these patterns slowly, through repetition, through boredom. Boredom was not failure. It was confirmation. A night without incident felt long. And that was good. As the city entered deep night, temperature dropped. Lantern flames burned lower. The watchman adjusted his pace again. This was the most difficult phase, not because of danger, but because of the body. Muscles stiffened. Eyelids grew heavy. Time stretched. The watchman did not fight this aggressively. That wasted energy. Instead, he used small habits. He changed direction briefly, shifted his grip on the staff, adjusted the lantern. These movements were subtle, almost invisible, but they kept awareness alive. In many ancient cities, this deep night was marked by sound, a bell, a drum, a wooden clapper. The sound was not meant to alarm. It was meant to reassured. It told sleepers that time was moving, that order remained. For the watchman, these signals divided the night into manageable spaces. They prevented the feeling of ESS, ESS. Between signals, he walked. After signals, he reset his focus. In places without such sounds, the watchman used nature instead. Stars shifting slightly. Wind changing direction. Cold settling deeper. Time was felt in the skin. As the night approached its final phase, something changed again. Not brightness, not sound, expectation. The watchman sensed morning before it arrived. Birds moved, air thinned, Darkness loosened. This final watch required renewed attention. Early workers began to move. Fires were relit. Doors opened quietly. Mistakes happened most often here. So the watchman remained alert until the very end. Only when responsibility passed to daylight did his own sense of time release him. The watchman's relationship with time did not end when his shift ended. It followed him home. It shaped how he rested, how he woke, how he thought. While others slept through the night and woke sharply with the sun, the watchman lived in fragments. Rest came in layers, not in a single deep stretch. Sleep was light, responsive, easily interrupted. This did not weaken him. It changed him. His sense of duration became flexible. An hour did not feel the same as it did to others. Some hours felt long and wide. Others passed without notice. This elasticity was useful at night. During long, quiet stretches, the watchman learned not to count time. Counting created impatience. Impatience led to mistakes. Instead, he anchored himself to tasks. Reach the corner. Pause at the well. Listen near the storehouse. Each small action replaced the need to measure. In cities where watchers were formally divided, this structure supported him. Knowing that a sound would come at a certain phase of night helped the body relax. There was a next marker. There was a rhythm. In cities without formal signals, watchmen relied more heavily on one another. A distant lantern moving on another route. Footsteps crossing briefly at an intersection. These moments of contact mattered. They reminded the watchman that he was not alone in the night, that the system extended beyond his own path. They shared. Timing created coordination without conversation. Two watchmen might never speak during a shift, yet they moved in relation to one another. Routes overlapped slightly. Pauses aligned naturally. This was not planned precisely. It emerged over time. The city learned the shape of its own night, and the watchman learned it with the city. Time also influenced how rules were enforced. An action that felt acceptable early in the night felt suspicious later. A person moving at dusk was ordinary. A person moving at deep night required attention. The watchman adjusted his response accordingly, not through rigid rules, but through judgment shaped by hour. This sensitivity prevented unnecessary conflict. A late worker returning home at the wrong moment might receive a warning rather than confrontation. The watchman understood context. Time was context. This understanding extended to emergencies as well. A small fire discovered early could be handled quietly. The same fire found later required immediate action. The watchman's decisions depended on when, not just what. As dawn approached, this sense sharpened further. Morning carried its own risks. People were tired. Attention was low. Tools were handled before full wakefulness. Fires were rekindled without care. Many accidents occurred at this edge between night and day. So the watchman's final hours were often the most demanding, not dramatic, just precise. He stayed present until the city fully shifted states. When his duty ended, he did not feel relief immediately. The body released slowly. Awareness lingered. Time continued to feel stretched. Even in daylight, this was the lasting mark of the night watchman. He lived slightly out of sync with others, not detached, just offset. This offset allowed him to do his work. As we continue, we will see how this unique relationship with time shaped the tools, signals, and routines that supported the watchmen's role. For now, the night remains measured, not by clocks, but by movement and pause. Time was also carried in the watchman's tools. Each object he held reflected an understanding of night that was slow and deliberate. The lantern was the most obvious of these tools. It was not designed to push darkness away. It was designed to coexist with it. Lantern light was small, contained. It illuminated only what was immediately necessary. Too much light created glare. It erased shadows that helped the eye adjust. The watchman learned to keep the flame low. This trained his vision. He became comfortable seeing less, recognizing shapes instead of details. Time passed differently in this reduced visibility. Movement slowed naturally. Attention narrowed. The staff or spear the watchman carried served more than one purpose. It was support for long hours of standing, a tool to test uncertain ground, a symbol of presence. It was rarely used aggressively. Its weight was familiar. Its balance known. The watchman's hands learned its feel over years. This familiarity reduced effort. Less effort conserved energy. Energy mattered most in the deepest hours. Signals were another extension of time. Bells, clappers, drums. Each sound had a specific place in the night. Not interchangeable. Not random. The watchman learned when to sound them and when to remain silent. Sound traveled farther at night. It shaped the experience of time for sleepers. A bell marked passage. A drum marked division. Silence marked stability. The watchman respected this balance. Clothing too was chosen with time in mind. Layers allowed adjustment without stopping. Loose garments accommodated movement without noise. Nothing about the watchman's appearance was accidental. Even if it seemed simple, it had been tested. Footwear mattered greatly. Smooth soles reduced sound. Flexible material adapted to uneven stone. A stumble wasted time. Injury removed presence. The watchman avoided both. Time also shaped routes themselves. Some streets were best walked early, others later. A market street emptied quickly. A residential alley quieted slowly. The watchman adjusted his sequence accordingly. Not all paths were equal at all hours. This knowledge accumulated quietly. It was rarely written down. It lived in memory and habit. When a new watchman joined, he learned through walking, not through explanation. An older watchman might say little. He would simply take a certain turn, pause at a certain corner. The younger one learned by matching pace. This transfer of knowledge preserved timing more effectively than instruction. Mistakes happened. A pause too long. A route taken too early. Older watchmen corrected gently. Timing errors were not punished harshly. Fear disrupted rhythm. Rhythm maintained order. The watchman's sense of time extended beyond his shift. Festivals altered timing completely. So did storms. On festival nights, watches stretched. Signals changed. The watchman stayed present longer. During storms, time compressed. Action followed action without pause. The watchman adapted to both extremes because his core skill was adjustment. Time was not rigid. It was responsive. This responsiveness allowed ancient cities to survive nights that were not ordinary. As we near the end of this part, it becomes clear that the watchman did not manage time. He listened to it. He aligned his body, his tools, and his movement with the night's natural flow as the night moved toward its quiet conclusion. The watchman's sense of time softened once more. This final stretch was not about vigilance alone. It was about release. The city did not wake all at once. It loosened slowly. A door opening here. A fire being rekindled there. The watchman observed these signs without urgency. They told him that the night had completed its work. This moment carried a particular calm. Not the deep stillness of midnight, but a gentle thinning of darkness. For the watchman, this was the most reflective phase. The body remained alert, but the mind eased. Nothing new was expected now. Only continuity. If the night had passed without incident, that success required no acknowledgement. There was no report to file, no celebration. The absence of events was the result. The watchman walked his final route with the same care as the first. No shortcuts, no rushing. Ending well mattered as much as beginning. When relief arrived, it did so quietly. Another watchman, a city official, a nod exchanged, responsibility transferred without ceremony. This handover was one of the most important moments in the system. It marked continuity across time, one awareness giving way to another. The watchman did not linger. Lingering blurred roles, he returned home as the city stepped into day. Daylight felt different to him. Too bright, too loud sounds arrived all at once. Smells overlapped. Time felt compressed again. He adjusted gradually. A simple meal, a short rest. Sleep came lightly but reliably. This cycle repeated itself over years. Night into day, awareness into rest. Through this repetition, the watchman's understanding of time deepened. He did not experience life as a straight line. He experienced it as a rhythm. This rhythm was shared by the city, even if most citizens never noticed it. They slept because someone stayed awake. They woke because someone had watched. In this way, time was communal, not personal. The watchman carried the city's nights within him, not as memories, but as patterns. When he aged, these patterns remained. Even after stepping away from duty, he woke early. He listened for sounds that no longer required his response. Night had shaped him permanently. As we close part 6, we leave behind numbers and hours. We leave behind clocks. We carry forward an older understanding of time, one measured in movement and stillness, in attention and pause. The watchman did not conquer the night. He moved alongside it. This gentle alignment allowed ancient cities to rest. Night after night, for generations, we will begin to turn toward change, toward moments when this ancient rhythm was disrupted, and how cities adapted when night itself began to transform. Something has begun to change, not abruptly, not loudly, but enough to be noticed. Ancient cities did not remain the same forever. Streets widened or narrowed. Walls expanded or fell into disuse. People arrived from elsewhere, bringing new habits with them, and the night responded. For the watchman, change was never theoretical. It was physical. It altered how darkness behaved, how sound traveled, how people moved after sunset. One of the first signs of change came through light. More lamps appeared in some cities, not everywhere, not evenly, but in certain districts, illumination increased. Markets stayed active longer. Workshops extended hours. Public spaces glowed faintly after dusk. This did not remove darkness. It reshaped it. Shadows became sharper. Contrast increased. The watchman's job did not become easier. It became different. Light created blind spots, bright pools surrounded by deeper dark. The eye had to adjust constantly. The watchman learned new routes of attention. He lingered at the edges of light. He watched where visibility dropped suddenly. People assumed light meant safety. This assumption was not always correct. The watchman understood this quietly. As lighting increased, expectations shifted. Citizens stayed out later. Movement after dark became more common. This blurred old patterns. A person walking late was no longer unusual. Context mattered more. The watchman adapted by observing behavior rather than presence, posture, pace, direction. He relied less on the hour and more on the body. Another change arrived through governance. Some cities introduced stricter curfews. Others relaxed them. These decisions were often political. Responses to unrest, attempts at control. The watchman became the interface between rule and reality. He enforced new limits gently, not through force, but through repetition. Most people complied when reminded calmly. They did not want conflict. They wanted rest. When rules changed too often, confusion followed. Confusion bred tension. The watchman felt this immediately. Nights became uneven. Voices sharper. He responded by increasing consistency. Walking at the same times. Using the same phrases. Stability calmed uncertainty. Population growth brought another layer of change. Cities grew denser. More people shared less space. Noise increased. Privacy thinned at night. This density amplified everything. A single disturbance traveled farther, affected more sleepers. The watchman shortened his pauses. He intervened earlier, not harshly, but sooner. Prevention replaced response. Trade also reshaped nights. Caravans arrived late. Merchants negotiated by lamplight. Foreign accents entered the dark. The watchman learned to distinguish difference from threat, curiosity from caution. He became, in small ways, a translator of space, of behavior. These changes did not eliminate the watchman's role. They confirmed it. The more complex the city became, the more necessary quiet supervision felt. We will move deeper into these transformations, toward moments when old systems stretched to their limits, and new ones began to form beside them. For now, we remain at the edge of change. The night still holds, but it no longer feels entirely the same. Change did not arrive evenly across the city. It appeared in pockets. One street brightened while another remained dark. One district enforced new rules while the next continued as before. For the watchman, this unevenness was the real challenge. He could no longer rely on a single rhythm for the entire city. Time fractured. Some places slept early. Others stayed awake late into the night. The watchman adjusted by learning multiple tempos. He carried them quietly, switching without effort. In brighter districts, people expected visibility to replace vigilance. They believed that light itself provided protection. Doors were left open longer. Conversations carried on without caution. The watchman did not correct these beliefs directly. He adapted his presence instead. He walked slower in lighted streets, knowing that movement was easier to see. He focused attention on the spaces between lamps, where contrast hid small actions. In darker districts, expectations remained unchanged. Residents still listened for familiar sounds. They still relied on the watchman's rhythm. Moving between these areas required sensitivity. A single tone did not fit all. Language changed to new populations brought different ways of using the night. Some cultures socialized after dark. Others avoided it. The watchman observed before acting. He learned which behaviors were normal for whom this observation reduced unnecessary confrontation. Not every unfamiliar action required intervention. Understanding replaced assumption. Technology, in its early forms, also began to influence nights. Improved lanterns burned longer. Oil quality improved. These tools reduced some risks, but introduced others. Longer burning lamps were left unattended. People trusted them too much. The watchman compensated by checking more frequently. Fire did not announce itself loudly. It crept. Governance continued to evolve as well. Some cities centralized control of night watch systems. Others delegated authority locally. Centralization brought standardization. Uniform routes. Uniform signals. This created clarity, but sometimes removed local knowledge. The watchman followed orders, but relied on experience. Local shortcuts. Seasonal adjustments. Unwritten habits. Tension arose when systems ignored reality. Rigid schedules failed to match living cities. When this happened, the watchman absorbed the strain. He bent rules quietly. He adjusted timing without notice. This flexibility preserved calm in cities where flexibility was punished. Watchmen became cautious. They followed rules exactly. These cities felt tighter at night, less forgiving. Sleep became lighter. Trust thinned. Citizens sensed this without explanation. Trade routes brought nights that never fully rested. Goods moved under cover of darkness. Animals rested and shifted. The watchman became mediator. He balanced rest with necessity. He guided traffic gently. He slowed movement where possible. He prevented congestion before it formed. None of this was dramatic. That was the point. The watchman's success lay in how little was noticed. As nights grew more complex, his role became less visible but more essential. He was no longer just guarding against danger. He was managing flow, movement, sound, expectation. By the time dawn arrived, most citizens believed the night had passed normally. They did not see the adjustments, the small decisions, the quiet corrections. That invisibility was intentional. We will explore moments when these adjustments were no longer enough, when change pushed too far, too fast, and old rhythms could not fully contain it. For now, the watchman continues, balancing old habits with new realities, walking steadily between them. As changes accumulated, there came nights when the watchman felt the strain more clearly, not as danger, but as effort. The city asked more of him without announcing it. Routes grew longer. Expectations multiplied. Contradictions appeared. One district demanded silence. Another demanded tolerance. One law restricted movement. Another encouraged trade after dark. The watchman stood between these demands, absorbing their friction. On such nights, his pace slowed further, not from fatigue alone, but from calculation. Each step required judgment, not dramatic judgment. Small, continuous choices. Should he pause here or continue? Should he speak or remain silent? Should he intervene now or wait? Waiting was often the wiser choice. Change created moments where old cues failed. A late moving figure no longer meant trouble. A quiet street no longer meant safety. The watchman adapted by reading bodies more closely. How someone held their shoulders, how quickly they changed direction, whether their movement matched purpose. These signals mattered more than location. He also learned to listen for emotion in sound, not volume, but tone. A raised voice in frustration differed from one in fear. A laugh carried differently than an argument. The watchman did not interpret perfectly. No one did. But his experience reduced error. In some cities, watchmen began keeping simple records, not of people, but of patterns. A note about repeated noise, a reminder of a faulty lamp, an observation about a market staying active later than before. These records were modest. They were meant to support memory, not replace it. They helped watchmen share information across shifts. Continuity mattered more than detail. As systems grew more complex, training shifted slightly. New watchmen were paired longer with experienced ones. Learning took more time. Cities recognized that night knowledge could not be rushed still. There were limits. At times, the city changed faster than the watch system could adjust. Population surged suddenly. Political unrest flared. Economic pressure increased nighttime activity beyond capacity. On these nights, the watchman focused on essentials: fire, violence, access to help. Everything else became secondary. This prioritization prevented collapse, not perfection. Ancient cities did not aim for flawless nights. They aimed for survivable ones. The watchman understood this instinctively. When expectations became unrealistic, he lowered them quietly. He did not promise safety. He maintained presence. Presence was enough to slow escalation, enough to buy time. Over time, cities that adapted successfully shared certain traits. They allowed watchmen discretion. They trusted experience over rigid rule. Cities that did not adapt became tense at night. Rules multiplied. Enforcement hardened. Sleep suffered. The watchman felt this difference immediately. His body tightened. His movements grew cautious. Caution replaced calm. In those environments, mistakes increased, not from neglect, but from fear. The most resilient cities recognized that night demanded flexibility, not force. The watchman embodied this lesson. He remained steady even as systems shifted around him by the end of such nights. When dawn finally arrived, relief was quiet, not satisfaction, just continuation. We will look at moments when transformation reached a turning point, when old night watch traditions began to give way to new forms of order. For now, the watchman continues walking, carrying change without letting it overwhelm the night. Eventually, change reached a point where it could no longer be absorbed quietly. The night did not break, but it bent in visible ways. In some cities, the watchman noticed that routines no longer settled people as they once had. Footsteps passed on time. Signals sounded as expected, yet sleep remained light. This was not failure. It was transition. New forms of order began to appear alongside the old. Permanent guards stationed at key locations. Gate systems reinforced with additional oversight. Administrative roles layered over traditional watching. The watchman did not disappear when this happened. He adjusted position. His routes shortened. His focus narrowed. He became part of a larger structure rather than its center. This shift felt subtle at first. A shared duty here, an instruction there. Over time, it reshaped the night. Authority moved upward. Decisions centralized. Responsibility spread. For some watchmen, this brought relief. Less ground to cover. clearer boundaries. For others, it brought distance, less discretion, less trust in judgment. The city's relationship with the night changed as well. People began to expect systems rather than presence, rules rather than rhythm. Light increased further. Noise lingered longer. The night grew less intimate. The watchman adapted by becoming quieter still, less visible, more specialized. He watched specific places instead of whole neighborhoods. He reported rather than intervened. This altered the emotional texture of night. Safety felt more formal, less personal. Some cities embraced this shift fully. Others resisted it. Where resistance occurred, old practices lingered. Watchmen continued walking traditional routes. Signals sounded at familiar times. These cities retained a softer night, one shaped by habit rather than enforcement. Neither approach erased the watchman's influence entirely. Even where systems grew complex, the principles remained. Presence mattered. Consistency calmed. Flexibility prevented fear. The watchman's legacy lived in these ideas. As generations passed, few remembered when the change had begun. It felt gradual, unremarkable, but the night itself carried memory. Streets, once dark, grew brighter. Silence thinned. The sense of being quietly accompanied faded. Still, in moments of uncertainty, cities returned to old instincts. They valued someone walking, someone listening, someone present. Even as roles changed, the need remained. As we close Part 7, we stand at the threshold between eras. The ancient night watchman still exists, but his world is shifting. The night is no longer shaped only by habit and trust. It is being reshaped by structure and control, as if stepping into a night that carries memory. The streets look familiar, yet something about them feels altered. Not broken, evolved. The watchman walks the same stones, but the stones remember more footsteps now. Generations have passed. Habits have layered themselves over older habits. The night holds them all. This part of the story is about legacy, not the dramatic kind written into monuments, but the quiet kind that settles into routine. As cities continued to change, the role of the watchman left traces behind. Even where the position shifted or narrowed, its influence remained embedded in how nights were managed. Rules about lighting, expectations of quiet, the idea that someone should be awake while others sleep. These did not vanish. They transformed in many places. The watchman's walking routes became fixed corridors of attention. Streets that had always been monitored remained prioritized. Intersections once paused that continued to receive care. Urban design absorbed memory. Walls were reinforced where watchmen had once lingered. Open spaces shrank where supervision had proven difficult. New buildings aligned themselves along lines already watched. The night shaped the city, and the watchman shaped the night as formal systems expanded. Elements of the old watch persisted quietly. Hour calls became clock signals. Lantern checks became inspections. Walking became patrolling. The pace changed, but the purpose did not. Where old watchmen had relied on familiarity, new systems relied on procedure. Yet procedure borrowed from habit. Even the language of night carried echoes. Terms for watches, names for hours, phrases tied to darkness and safety. These words survived long after the original roles faded. For citizens, the feeling of night changed slowly. People slept differently, more deeply in some ways, more lightly in others. Artificial light extended waking hours. but it also blurred boundaries. The Watchman's legacy helped cities manage this blur. Quiet zones, closing times, signals that told people when to slow. Without these inherited ideas, nights became chaotic more easily. We can see this most clearly in moments of failure, when systems collapsed briefly, when power failed, when enforcement disappeared. In those moments, cities often reverted instinctively to older behaviors. Neighbors watched. Someone stayed awake. Movement slowed. The watchman returned in spirit, even if not in name. This reveals something important. The watchman was not just a role. It was a response to human need, the need to rest without surrendering awareness, the need to share vulnerability. This need does not disappear with technology. It changes form. We will explore how these inherited patterns surfaced in later eras, how ancient night practices influenced medieval towns, and how echoes of the watchman persisted even further. For now, we remain here, in a city that remembers its nights, where the past still walks quietly beside the present. As centuries unfolded, the night inherited habits it did not fully remember creating. Cities no longer paused to ask why certain rules existed. They simply followed them. Curfews remained, even when their origins were forgotten. Lighting standards persisted, even as materials improved. The expectation that someone should be awake at night continued, quietly assumed. This inheritance was not neat. It layered itself unevenly across places. In some towns, the old walking routes survived, almost unchanged. In others, they dissolved into administrative boundaries. Yet the logic behind them lingered. Corners that once felt unsafe were redesigned. Narrow alleys widened. Public spaces softened. These changes were not always conscious. They emerged from long memory, from nights that had once required attention. The watchman's legacy also appeared in sound. Church bells, town clocks, signals marking hours. These sounds replaced earlier calls, but they served the same function. They told people where they were in the night. They reassured sleepers that time was moving forward, even when people no longer listened closely. The sounds shaped rest. Silence without context can feel heavy. Structured sound lightens it. Communities learned this long ago. The idea of shared night responsibility also persisted. In times of uncertainty, people organized watches spontaneously, not because of instruction, but because of instinct. A neighbor stayed up. A light remained on. Movement slowed. These actions mirrored ancient practices. They reappeared whenever the night felt unguarded. Technology changed tools, not instincts. As artificial lights spread further, nights grew brighter but also flatter. Shadows lost depth. Contrast softened this altered perception. People felt safer in some ways, but more exposed in others. The watchman's presence, once embodied by a person, shifted into systems, patrol schedules, surveillance points, reporting chains. These systems worked best when they remembered the old balance. Presence without aggression, observation without intrusion. When systems forgot this, nights became tense. Too much control disrupted rest. Too little attention invited uncertainty. The watchman's legacy guided. Moderation, cultural memory preserved this lesson in stories and customs. Folk tales spoke of night guardians. Songs referenced hours watched over these were not historical records. They were emotional ones. They kept the idea alive. As cities expanded further, the night fractured again. Some districts never slept. Others retreated early. The challenge returned in new form. How to allow activity without eroding rest. How to observe without dominating. Ancient answers still applied. Consistency, predictability, gentle presence in places where planners listened to history. Nights remained livable where they did not. Nights grew restless. The watchman's influence can be felt even here, not as a figure, but as a principle. Someone is paying attention. Someone will notice. This belief does not require proof every night. It requires continuity. We will move closer to the end of the ancient thread. We will examine how the idea of watching the night became abstracted, and what that abstraction cost. For now, the city holds its memory quietly. The night continues, and the legacy remains present even when unseen. As the idea of watching the night grew more abstract, something subtle shifted in how people related to darkness. When responsibility moved from a person to a system, the night felt different, not worse, just less personal in ancient cities. The watchman's presence was felt through rhythm. Footsteps, pauses, familiar sounds returning at expected times. As these signals transformed into mechanisms, the rhythm remained, but the warmth changed. Predictability stayed. Intimacy thinned. People slept knowing a system existed, not necessarily knowing who was awake. This distance altered trust in quiet ways. Where once reassurance came from recognition, now it came from procedure. Rules posted. Hours enforced. Lights maintained. These worked. But they worked differently. When something felt wrong in the night, people hesitated longer before acting. They waited for systems to respond. They trusted processes rather than neighbors. This was efficient, but it also slowed communal response. The watchman's older role had included interpretation. He understood context without being told. He adjusted tone without instruction. Systems struggled with this. They required clarity. They favored uniformity. In most nights, this was enough. In unusual nights, gaps appeared. People sensed these gaps, even if they could not name them. Sleep became lighter in places where nights felt overmanaged. Heavier in places where nights felt abandoned. The balance remained delicate. Urban memory continued to play a role. Cities that remembered their nights tended to design with restraint. They avoided excessive brightness. They preserved quiet corridors. Cities that forgot pushed activity everywhere. Night lost its texture. Rest became shallow. The watchman's legacy offered guidance here, even without being cited. Designers spoke of flow, of zones, of transitions. These ideas echoed ancient practices. Night was not meant to be erased. It was meant to be shaped gently. In moments of crisis, the abstraction thinned. Power failures, natural disasters, periods of unrest, suddenly, systems fell silent. Lights went out. Rules paused. In these moments, people returned to older instincts quickly. They listened. They watched. They stayed awake together. Someone always stepped into the role. A neighbor, a volunteer, a figure walking slowly with a light. The watchman reappeared without announcement. This pattern repeated across cultures and eras. Whenever the night felt exposed, the idea of a watcher returned. This persistence reveals something essential. The watchman was never only about control. He was about shared awareness. Awareness that did not demand constant action. Only presence as abstraction increased. The challenge became how to preserve this feeling, how to maintain reassurance without relying solely on systems. Some cities managed this through community involvement. Night markets monitored by locals, residential patrols shared informally. Others relied entirely on centralized oversight. These cities felt efficient, but colder at night. Neither approach was permanent. Cities shifted back and forth. The watchman's legacy acted like a compass rather than a map. It did not dictate solutions. It pointed toward balance. We will consider what this legacy ultimately leaves behind, not in structures or rules, but in how people imagine the night itself. For now, the city remains in transition. Old habits echo. New systems hum softly. The night holds both, as the night continued to change. The memory of the watchman settled into something quieter still. It became less about who was watching, and more about how watching felt. People learned to sense safety without seeing its source. They slept because the night behaved in familiar ways, because sound followed expectation, because darkness remained structured. This structure did not require constant enforcement. It required continuity. When continuity broke, even briefly, unease returned, not panic, just a thinning of rest. Cities noticed this pattern over time. They learned that night needed signals of care, not dominance, not spectacle, soft light rather than harsh brightness, predictable closure rather than sudden silence, movement that felt intentional rather than random. These lessons echoed the watchman's old habits: slow walking, regular pauses, gentle acknowledgement. Urban planners did not always name this influence, but they responded to it. Spaces were designed to feel watched without feeling invaded. Sightlines opened, corners softened, transitions marked. Night became navigable rather than erased. Culturally, the watchman lived on in language. Expressions about keeping watch, phrases tied to hours passed safely. Stories where night was guarded rather than feared. These did not describe real watchmen anymore. They described reassurance. Children grew up hearing these words without context, yet the feeling remained. In families, night routines preserved ancient logic. Doors locked at certain times. Lights dimmed gradually. Voices lowered instinctively. These behaviors required no instruction. They were inherited. Even as technology advanced, people continued to value the idea that someone noticed the night. Security cameras appeared. Patrol vehicles replaced footsteps. Control rooms replaced lanterns. Yet when people spoke about feeling safe, they rarely mentioned devices. They spoke about calm streets, about knowing what to expect. This is the watchman's final gift. Expectation, the sense that night unfolds within boundaries, that nothing sudden will intrude without warning, that if it does, someone will respond. This belief allows rest. As we close part 8, we can see how far the ancient night watchman has traveled, from a figure walking stone streets to an idea woven into how cities imagine darkness. The watchman no longer needs a name. His presence is felt in restraint, in moderation, in the choice to accompany night rather than conquer it. We will begin our final descent. We will look at the gradual disappearance of the watchman as a distinct role, and what was lost and gained when night became something else entirely. For now, we pause in this layered city, where memory and habit overlap, where the night still carries a quiet promise of care. By now, the ancient watchman is no longer always visible. In many cities, His footsteps have been replaced by systems, schedules, and structures that operate at a distance. The night still functions, but it does so with less human texture. This part of the story is about disappearance, not sudden removal, but gradual fading. In many places, the role of the night watchman narrowed over time. He no longer walked entire neighborhoods. He no longer knew every doorway. His presence became concentrated at specific points: gates, administrative buildings, market districts. The city no longer needed someone everywhere. It needed someone somewhere. This shift changed how nights felt. When presence was spread thinly across many watchmen, the city felt accompanied. When presence became fixed in stations, the city felt observed. Observation is not the same as accompaniment. The watchman's old role had included interpretation. He adjusted to context. He responded to subtle cues. New systems prioritized clarity. Rules had to be enforceable. Signals had to be standardized. Ambiguity became undesirable. This made nights more predictable, but also less forgiving. A late movement that once earned a quiet reminder now triggered formal response. Not harshly, just officially. People noticed the change. They began to behave differently at night. Movement became purposeful or absent. Casual wandering faded. The night lost some of its softness. Lighting increased further. Darkness retreated from main streets. Shadows collected only at the edges. This altered sleep as well. Brightness extended waking hours. Rest compressed. People adapted. But something subtle shifted. The watchman's disappearance as a familiar figure meant that reassurance no longer came from recognition. It came from expectation of enforcement. For many, this felt sufficient. For others, it felt distant. The difference was emotional, not functional. In cities where communal trust remained strong, the loss was barely noticed. Neighbors still watched indirectly. Customs still guided behavior. In cities where trust was thin, the absence felt heavier. Nights became tense. Sleep grew lighter. This divergence shaped urban identity. Some cities leaned fully into systems. They accepted the trade. Efficiency over intimacy. Others resisted quietly. They preserved informal watching alongside formal structures. A shopkeeper stayed late with the lights low. A resident looked out the window when sounds changed. Someone remained awake. These small acts echoed ancient patterns. They did not aim to replace systems. They filled emotional gaps. As the watchman faded, the idea of watching the night did not disappear. It redistributed. Responsibility scattered among devices, officials, and citizens. This scattering diluted presence, but expanded coverage. The night became less personal, but more regulated. We will explore how this transition affected people's relationship with fear, with rest, and with the idea of safety itself. For now, we remain in this thinning night, where footsteps are fewer, where light is stronger, and where the old watchman is becoming a memory rather than a companion. As the watchman's presence faded from the streets, people began to relate to fear differently, not more intensely, but more privately. In the ancient city, fear at night had been shared. If something felt wrong, it was often felt by more than one person. A sound disturbed several sleepers. A light appeared where it did not belong. The watchman noticed first, but the city noticed together. As systems replaced walking presence, fear became individualized. A person heard a noise and waited. They assumed someone else would respond, or that a system would activate if needed. This waiting changed the emotional texture of night. People felt less responsible for one another's rest. They trusted structures instead. Distrust was not misplaced. Systems were often effective, but they did not reassure in the same way. Reassurance once came from familiarity, from knowing who was awake, from recognizing rhythm. Now reassurance came from procedure, from believing that rules were in place, from expecting intervention if thresholds were crossed. This expectation altered sleep subtly. People slept deeper when systems functioned perfectly. They slept lighter when systems felt distant or opaque. Uncertainty did not disappear. It relocated. The watchman's old role had included interpretation of small things. A door left open accidentally. A traveler resting briefly. Systems required definition. An open door became a report. A resting traveler became a case. This clarity reduced ambiguity, but it also reduced forgiveness. Night behavior became more deliberate. People avoided actions that might be misunderstood. Spontaneity diminished. In some places, this created calmer nights. In others, it created tension. The difference lay in whether people felt seen or merely monitored. Being seen implies recognition. Being monitored implies evaluation. The watchman had once offered the former. Systems tended toward the latter. Over time, cities adapted emotionally to this shift. New customs emerged. People checked in digitally. They informed authorities before acting. They deferred responsibility upward. These behaviors were efficient. They reduced risk, but they also thinned communal awareness. Moments of crisis revealed this difference clearly. When systems failed temporarily, people hesitated. They waited for instructions. They looked for signals that did not arrive. Eventually, someone acted, but the pause felt unfamiliar. In cities where informal watching had persisted alongside systems, this pause was shorter. Neighbors moved more quickly. Responsibility felt closer. The watchman's legacy influenced this resilience, where his principles remained embedded. People adapted faster. The night itself seemed to respond. Noise settled sooner. Movement organized itself naturally. Where those principles had been forgotten, nights felt brittle under stress. The watchman's disappearance also changed how cities remembered danger. Incidents were recorded precisely. Data replaced stories. This improved analysis, but it removed emotional context. A night with no incidents felt empty rather than successful. Success became invisible in the ancient city. Success had been felt in sleep itself. This difference matters as we move forward. We see that the watchman did not simply vanish. He dissolved into systems, habits, and expectations. His presence became abstract. His influence remained concrete. We will explore how this abstraction reshaped the idea of responsibility. Who, exactly, is responsible for the night now? For now, we remain in this altered darkness, where fear is quieter, more contained, and less shared than it once was. As responsibility for the night shifted, it became harder to say who, exactly, was awake for whom. In ancient cities, the answer had been simple. The watchman walked. The city slept. Now the answer was distributed. Responsibility moved upward into institutions, outward into devices, and inward into personal habits. Each carried part of the night. None carried all of it. This diffusion changed behavior quietly. People became more careful about their own spaces. Doors were reinforced, windows secured. Personal routines tightened. Protection moved closer to the individual. At the same time, people expected less from neighbors. Noise complaints were reported rather than addressed. Concerns were documented rather than discussed. The watchman's old role as mediator faded. This did not make cities unsafe, but it changed how safety felt. Safety became something provided rather than shared. In places where this shift was embraced fully, night felt orderly but distant. Streets were calm, yet emotionally quiet. In places where the shift felt imposed, tension surfaced. Rules were followed, but trust thinned. The watchman had once represented a visible contract. He was awake for you. You could sleep. Now the contract was implicit. Systems were assumed to function. Failures were considered exceptional. This assumption worked most of the time, but it altered how people responded when something felt wrong. Instead of stepping outside to listen, people stayed inside and waited. Instead of calling out, they called systems. This waiting was rational. It reduced risk, but it also slowed collective response. In moments when systems lagged, uncertainty expanded quickly. The watchman's disappearance also affected how time was experienced at night. Without walking presence, the night felt flatter. Signals still existed. Clocks chimed. Lights cycled. But these signals were detached from movement. Time passed, but nothing seemed to accompany it. Sleep adjusted accordingly. Some people slept more deeply, trusting automation. Others slept lightly, listening for signs that no longer came. This split created different relationships with night within the same city. The watchman's legacy lingered strongest in places where people still felt entitled to notice, to step outside briefly, to check on unfamiliar sounds. These acts were small, but they maintained connection. In many cultures, these habits survived through informal customs. A light left on near an entrance. A shopkeeper closing later than required. A caretaker walking a familiar route. These were not official duties. They were gestures. Gestures preserved reassurance. As systems expanded, cities learned to incorporate these gestures intentionally. Design encouraged visibility without exposure. Shared spaces remained observable. Transitions were softened. Where this integration succeeded, nights remained humane where it failed. Nights became efficient but brittle. The watchman's influence can be felt here as well. Not as nostalgia, but as guidance. Responsibility does not disappear when distributed. It changes form. The challenge is to preserve shared awareness even when roles are abstracted. We will look at how this redistribution of responsibility prepared the ground for the modern night. A night that is brighter, quieter, and watched in new ways. For now, the city holds its breath slightly. The watchman is gone from the streets, but his shadow still shapes how the night is lived. As the modern night took shape, the final traces of the ancient watchman settled into the background. They did not vanish. They softened. The idea that night required care became embedded in infrastructure rather than people. Streets were designed to be visible. Buildings oriented toward light. Spaces organized to discourage uncertainty. This approach worked. Nights became quieter. Predictability increased. Yet something subtle was lost. When watching became automatic, awareness thinned. People no longer listened in the same way. They trusted systems to listen for them. This trust allowed deeper rest for many, but it also reduced attentiveness to one another. The ancient watchman had once been a reminder, not a warning, a reminder that someone was present. Modern systems rarely convey presence. They convey capability. Capability reassures differently. When something goes wrong, systems respond quickly. But before that response, the night can feel empty. In ancient cities, emptiness was rare. Even silence felt inhabited. This difference shaped how people remembered nights. Memories shifted from shared experience to individual incident. A quiet night left no impression. A disturbed night became data. The watchman's world had been built on continuity. The modern night leaned toward exception. Both approaches served their time. As cities expanded further, the need for scale outweighed the need for intimacy. No single person could walk every street. No single rhythm could hold the whole city. Systems were inevitable, yet, even within these systems, echoes persisted. Patrol routes mirrored old paths. Shift changes resembled ancient watches. Signals marked time, even if fewer noticed. The structure remained familiar, even as the meaning changed. People still spoke of quiet nights as a success. They still valued predictability after dark. They still felt unease when patterns broke. These feelings traced back to the watchman's work. As we close part 9, we see that the disappearance of the watchman was not an ending. It was a transformation. His role diffused into design, into habit, into expectation. The night became something managed rather than accompanied. Safer in many ways, lonelier in others. In the final part of our journey, we will return to the beginning. Not to the ancient streets themselves, but to the feeling they produced. We will reflect on what it meant to share the night with someone who walked it deliberately, slowly, and without spectacle. For now, we pause here, at the edge of the modern night, where the watchman no longer walks, but where his presence is still quietly felt. We enter the final part slowly, without announcing an ending. The night does not end abruptly. It fades. By now, the watchman has walked far beyond any single city or era. He exists less as a figure and more as a memory carried in how we rest. Part 10 is not about loss or nostalgia. It is about understanding what remains. When we look back across ancient nights, one pattern stands quietly above all others. The watchman did not exist to prevent everything from happening. He existed to make the night feel held. This feeling was never perfect. Mistakes occurred. Fires happened. Voices rose. Yet beneath all of this ran a steady current of attention. Someone was awake. This simple fact allowed people to let go. The watchman did not promise safety as an absolute. He promised presence. Presence without intrusion. Awareness without urgency. This balance mattered more than strength or authority. As centuries passed and cities grew complex, this balance became harder to maintain. Scale demanded systems. Speed demanded automation. And yet, the need that created the watchman never disappeared. Even now, people sleep better when the night feels predictable. When sound behaves as expected. When light follows familiar patterns. These comforts do not come from devices alone. They come from design choices rooted in old understanding, gradual transitions into darkness, spaces that feel observed but not exposed, routines that signal closure without fear. These are ancient ideas wearing modern forms. The watchman's work was never about watching people. It was about watching space, about listening to how a city breathed after sunset. That listening shaped everything. When the watchman disappeared as a person, cities had to learn how to listen differently. Some succeeded. Some struggled. Where listening remained gentle, nights stayed humane. Where listening became rigid, nights felt colder. This distinction still matters. We can see it in how people describe places. Some cities feel calm at night. Others feel tense. The difference is rarely crime statistics. It is atmosphere. Atmosphere is built slowly, from countless uneventful nights. The watchman understood this instinctively. He did not chase danger. He reduced its opportunity. He did not demand silence. He allowed it to emerge as we near the end of this long journey. It becomes clear that the watchman's greatest legacy is not protection. It is permission to rest, to lower guard, to trust the night. This permission is fragile. It must be renewed constantly. Every generation renegotiates its relationship with darkness, with sound, with presence. That the ancient watchman offers a quiet guide here. Not a model to replicate exactly, but a principle to remember. Night does not need to be conquered. It needs to be accompanied. We will complete this reflection. We will allow the watchman to step fully into memory, and we will close the night gently, the way it always closed best. For now, we remain here, at the calm edge of understanding, where nothing urgent waits, and the night feels complete enough to rest within. As we continue toward the end, the night feels softer now, not quieter, just settled. The ancient watchman no longer needs to walk beside us. His work has already been absorbed into the way the night unfolds. We feel it in the pause between sounds, in the way streets empty, gradually rather than suddenly. This gentleness is not accidental, it is learned over centuries. Cities discovered that night responds best to patience. Force creates resistance. Brightness creates fatigue. Urgency creates fear. The watchman embodied the opposite qualities: slowness, consistency, restraint. These qualities shaped not only safety, but emotion. People did not sleep because nothing could happen. They slept because whatever happened would be noticed calmly. This distinction is subtle, but essential. Even today, moments of true rest come not from absolute certainty, but from trust in response. A city that never sleeps can still feel safe, but it rarely feels restful. Rest requires permission to disengage. The watchman offered that permission quietly. He did not ask for gratitude. He did not seek recognition. His success was invisibility. This invisibility is why he fades so easily from records, and why his influence lingers so deeply when people speak about peaceful nights. They rarely mention security. They describe feeling held, contained, at ease. These feelings echo ancient experience. The watchman's lantern was small, but it marked intention. Someone chose to stay awake so others could rest. That choice remains meaningful in modern life. Staying awake has become constant. Lights remain on. Activity extends indefinitely, yet exhaustion has increased rather than decreased. This suggests something important. The watchman was not about maximizing activity. He was about protecting stillness. Stillness is difficult to engineer. It must be allowed. The ancient city allowed stillness by slowing itself down, by dimming gradually, by lowering voices, by trusting routine. The watchman supported this process without dominating it. As technology advanced, this balance became harder to maintain. Tools multiplied, control increased, yet the need for Stillness did not vanish. It simply moved. People now seek it. Deliberately, in quiet neighborhoods, in predictable routines, in places where nights feel gentle. These preferences are not new. They are ancient. They come from a time when someone walked the streets slowly, listening as we move closer to the final block. We can let go of history as chronology and hold it instead as understanding. The Watchman teaches us that safety is not only a function of power, it is a function of care. Care that is visible enough to reassure, but subtle enough not to intrude. This balance remains rare and valuable. For now, we remain within this softened night. Nothing presses forward. Nothing demands. Attention, the city rests, and we rest with it. As the night settles further, we begin to notice something simple and steady beneath all the change we have traced. Across centuries, across centuries, across tools and systems, the human body has remained the same. It still tires. It still listens. It still seeks reassurance before letting go. The ancient Watchman understood this without theory. He worked with the body, not against it. He did not demand constant alertness from the city. He absorbed that demand himself. This transfer mattered. When one person accepts wakefulness, many can rest. When wakefulness is scattered, rest becomes fragile. The Watchman's presence concentrated awareness. It gave the night a center. As that center dissolved into systems, awareness spread. Spread is efficient, but it is also thin. Thin awareness requires constant reinforcement, signals, notifications, rules. The ancient night required fewer of these. Its reassurance was embodied. We can feel the difference even now. A single, calm presence often comforts more than many distant assurances. This is not an argument against progress. It is an observation about human response. The Watchman's nights were slow because slowness allowed alignment. Breath matched pace. Attention matched sound. Modern nights are faster, but the body has not changed speed. This mismatch creates restlessness. The Watchman's legacy offers a counterpoint. Not a return, but a reminder. That night does not need to be filled. It needs to be shaped. Shaping does not require control. It requires care. Care expressed through predictability, through gentle boundaries, through restraint. When ancient cities practiced this, nights felt in Alexandria bad. When they forgot it, nights grew harsh. Even when well-lit, the Watchman's work sat at the intersection of environment and emotion. He managed neither directly. He mediated between them. This mediation is easy to overlook. It leaves no artifact, no monument. Its success is measured in sleep. As we approach the close of this long telling, we can see that the Watchman's story is not really about the past. It is about a relationship between people and darkness, between activity and rest, between presence and absence. This relationship continues to evolve, but it does not escape its origins. Every time a city dims gradually, every time noise lowers without command, every time someone stays awake so others can sleep, the Watchman returns briefly, not in uniform, not with a lantern, but as an idea made visible. This idea is modest. It does not promise perfect safety. It promises attention that is calm, that does not rush, that does not amplify fear. This is the kind of attention that allows trust to grow, trust that nothing needs to be solved right now, that the night can be allowed to pass. We will let this idea settle fully. We will close the night not with conclusion, but with quiet acceptance. For now, we remain here, breathing with the city, listening without effort, allowing the night to be what it is. Now the night reaches its natural close, not an ending, but a settling. There is nothing left to explain, only something to allow. The ancient watchman steps fully into memory here. He does not disappear. He becomes unnecessary. This is not loss. It is completion. His work was never meant to be permanent. It existed to teach a rhythm, and once learned, the rhythm could continue without him. The city knows when to slow now. It understands how to dim, how to lower sound without command. These understandings are fragile, but they persist. When they fade, the night grows uneasy. When they return, rest follows. The watchman's life was built around this cycle. Wakefulness offered so that others could sleep. Attention held so that fear could loosen. There was no glory in this exchange. That was its strength. He walked because walking was enough. He listened because listening changed outcomes before action was required. Most of his nights left no mark, and that was the measure of success. As we step away from history now, we do not need to carry dates or names. We carry a feeling, the feeling of a night that does not rush, of darkness that is accompanied rather than resisted, of silence that is structured, not empty. This feeling still matters. It matters when cities plan, when homes settle for the night, when people decide how late to stay awake. It matters whenever rest is possible. The ancient watchman reminds us that safety and calm are not built through intensity. They are built through continuity, one quiet night after another, one uneventful hour following the next. This continuity creates trust. Trust creates rest, and rest allows life to continue with care. The watchman did not need recognition. He did not require memory. He required only that the night pass gently. In this he succeeded. As we release him now, we do not say goodbye. We say thank you without words. Thank you for the nights that passed without incident, for the sleep that deepened without awareness, for the calm that arrived without explanation. The city rests because someone once stayed. Awake, that understanding remains. And so, the night closes the way it always did best. Without announcement, without urgency, just a slow thinning of darkness, a soft return of light, and the quiet sense that nothing needs to be done right now. You may rest. The watch is complete.